I have a very good panel today, and we will have some fun discussion regarding med device investments. So I'll let everybody introduce quickly, and then we'll dig into some interesting topics.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kwame Omer. I serve as a venture partner in Waymaker 360. We're a healthcare-focused fund, and we invest in digital health technologies, medical devices, and diagnostics. Besides some of the basic mechanics, participating in raises at the seed, bridge to A or A rounds, and typically the seed raises for companies raising somewhere between 1 and 3 million. What differentiates our firm is we believe in value-based care as a model. So technologies that are helping patients heal in the home is something to focus on. And we have approximately 80 LPs, and over 40 of those LPs are healthcare executives, so they can make strategic introductions to customers when our companies get to market. So that's what kind of sets us apart. What we like to tout is why you should come talk to us. That's all fun.
Cool. Good morning, guys. My name is Jerry Brunk. I'm a partner with Lumira Ventures in Boston. Lumira is based in Toronto. Founded about 30 years ago. Partners in Montreal, Vancouver, and Toronto. We invest in both biotechnology and medical devices in North America, so Canada and the US. Today we're managing about $400 million of capital, actively investing out of a new fund as of about a year ago. We've been long-time investors in medical technologies and medical devices. We think it's a very important complement and ability to look across both therapeutic drug interventions for disease states as well as medical device interventions. And oftentimes the best approach we think is a medical device as opposed to a drug. So we continue to be very active in the field. Some of our current investments in the realm generally include RESI diagnostics, Sonics, Via medical, cardiac dimensions. Years back, we were founding investor of Mako Surgical, so really coming across robotics, cardiovascular health, orthopedics, neurostimulation, and super excited to be here with you guys today.
Great, good morning. My name is Lauren Tyra. I'm the principal scientist at Green Partner Golf Ventures. We're a Dallas-based firm. We do early stage investing very broadly in healthcare, so that's everything from small molecules, biologics, medical devices, diagnostics, what I like to call life science tools, things like, the best example would be 10x Genomics has, a life science tool that's used for discovery. We like those types of companies also. We probably have the smallest fund. We have about 75 million under management right now, and we really like to invest in Texas if we can, but we're not limited to Texas. We have many companies within California, as well as throughout the Midwest and throughout the United States. Multidisciplinary team, so scientists, we have a physician, we have 2 MBAs, one with a background in finance and one with a background in healthcare practice management. So we really like to analyze companies holistically and try and help out when we can. Similar to my colleague over here, we have a lot of our limited partners who, when they can be helpful, we'll put them on board observer seats and healthcare executives and physicians to help us validate that companies as well as be useful to the company.
Thank you. My name is Neil Swami. I'm a principal with Catalyst Health Ventures. We're an early stage medtech investor based in Boston. We'll invest in what we call therapeutic devices that are disease modifying where drugs don't work. Generally mechanical solutions to mechanical problems, generally have limited science or clinical risk. Generally there are animal models where if you plug a hole or you can make something move faster, it'll probably work well in humans. We like to invest very early, so preclinical, early clinical. We like to take leads, take board seats, and really drive the company towards a strategic exit. Typically, it's about 1 to 5 million per round, 5 to 15 million per deal. And 2 example companies that we were the first venture investors in, Envision and Augmentics. Those sold to Boston Scientific in 2018. And those are kind of spot-on examples for the types of investments that.
Thank you. So I would to start off the discussion where one of the first questions that get hit as a med device investor is that what is the optimum time of your investment and what would you like to invest in a given company at the stage specifically. So coming from our perspective, I can talk about how we do it. Looking at all the data we have seen is that for us, optimum time and the where value and risk mitigation balances out for us is usually within 1 year of the approval, whether it's a 510K or a PMA. We have invested in both, and given that even though we came within 1 year of the PMA, as you know, PMA can take a whole lot longer, so we ended up holding for another 2.5 years on top of that. So given that we like to only see companies when they are within eyesight of the submission in that sense. So I'll let the panel tell about their funding strategy as far as timing and is concerned.
We have a similar window, except ours is even shorter. We like to invest with companies have a good shot at being approved or cleared within 6 months. And because we're a first-time fund in an early stage fund, we also recognize that there's some slop in that system. And because our real value add is making introductions to customers, we have access to thought leaders, which may help in ramping sales. We believe our most value we can provide is when the company is in market. That's why we, and then again, just restate what you said, the time to market may slip a bit, so we have to take that into account.
Thanks. Question maybe first, how many of y'all are entrepreneurs or CEOs or founders? That's awesome, that's great. Give the artists a we've all been there. So, I guess what I would say in terms of our stage, we invest, at least within medical technologies, we can go very early. If, as Neil said, there's a predictive animal model, which oftentimes there is, it's an entirely new physiology or anatomy that's going to be tackled. We do like to see some first-in-man data. What I would give to you guys as advice generally, though, is no matter how early it is, I think most of us as investors really love to get to know you as early as possible. That may feel a lot earlier maybe than our investment focus is stage-wise, but if we can provide a little bit of guidance along the way. We invested in a company last year, I think I mentioned this with Sonics in Ann Arbor, which I first met 11 years before our investment. Now they pivoted along the way to a different therapeutic application of that technology, but clearly if you wait until what I would tell you is our general stage, it's probably too late. We really do love to get to know entrepreneurs and follow the progress and the thought process. So I guess pretty agnostic, really, from the foundational idea all the way up through the revenue stage. And depending on the sector, the therapeutic area, we'll have our sweet spots.
I think we're fairly similar, and I will echo your comments about keeping in touch and keeping up with people. And we've had companies that we followed for 2 years before they got to a stage where we wanted to make an investment because we had that prior relationship. It makes it easier for us. So our check size would be anywhere between $250,000 and $2.5 million, and that's incredibly broad. We will go very early, as in idea phase or first licensed out of the technology is actually licensed out of the university and it has a team around it and we're some of the first money in. All the way to if a medical device or a life science tool is actively being marketed and is revenue generating, we may put more capital in or a larger check in at that point. We certainly really like to get in early to a company and then continue to grow with the company when and where that is possible.
Echo that ×3. Get to know companies very early. I think every company we've invested in, we've known for at least 2 years and have had at least 4 meetings with. So even if it's a bit early, love to stay in touch, keep us updated. For us, early stage, the goalposts move depending on the therapeutic area. So if it's cardiology, where exits generally happen a bit earlier, we will invest a bit earlier. If it's other spaces where exits happen at approval, we'll typically come in first in human, if not a little bit later. If exits happen in the space with revenues, if not more, we'll typically come in after human proof of concept, if not a little. So that's kind of how we define early stage.
So I would like to reiterate this one point that there is a relationship building with your investors. So nothing will happen at the first meeting. It's a continuous process where we would like to see the company and the management keep up to pace with the commitments and the targets they have. And that builds a lot of confidence on both sides, actually, to accomplish any investment goals. Now, one of the things is also very key these days is the reimbursement guidance, as far as, because we mostly are coming in before the codes have been set. Perhaps in Tommy's case, they come in a little bit later, where they have more realistic understanding of what kind of reimbursements would be out there for the potential assets. So I would start off from Swami's side, and like, when you guys invest, what kind of reimbursement kind of evidence do you like to see, and how do you evaluate that? Because a lot of that is unknown at the point that you guys and everybody else usually comes in.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating question, and I think you'll get 4 different answers, and mine is probably going to be a bit contrarian. So I come from a bit of a biotech background, where I'm used to biotech-like validation and appropriately designed RCTs. When you apply that to medical devices, where you need to show not just clinical value, but clinical utility in a trial that physicians cannot argue with, those are the types of things that we like. So it's not, again, it might be contrarian, but we prefer not to look at the standard 510K, no clinicals, easy predicate type stuff. We tend to look more at those devices that require a sham-controlled RCT in 300 to 500 patients. That's at least a $10 to $30 million trial, but is de-risked because it's a device with a mechanical solution to a mechanical problem that has proof of concept in 20 to 50 patients. Because if you can show clinical value and clinical utility, meaning cost savings or some kind of derivative of cost savings, we think people will pay for it. It's just a matter of going through the dance, the 2-year dance of the codes, and everybody knows that process. So we like things that we feel confident can work in a sham-controlled RCT in a lot of patients. And if it works, it will get paid. It's just a matter of time. I'll give one quick example. So Augmentics Medical, it's a hydrogel spacer between the prostate and the rectum for prostate cancer radiation. Rectal complications happen in 7 to 10% of patients, so it seems small, but the spacer takes those complications down to 0. So we ran an appropriately designed pivotal trial, got PMA approval, struggled to get reimbursement because people said, well, it's only a 7 to 10% complication rate, but man, is it bad, right? Then started paying for it out of pocket. And ultimately, we got reimbursement and the company sold it for biotech-like returns. So that's kind of how we think about it.
Reimbursement is definitely an important thing to understand, and also from evaluating an investment first standpoint of if there is a medical device on the market that is reimbursed at a certain level, and CPT codes are known and reimbursement is known, and you're coming in with, let's say, a superior medical device, maybe a 510K, and you're going to charge 3 times as much, but you don't fit into that reimbursement code, or you're going to try and squeeze yourself into that reimbursement code, that definitely makes it a lot more of a struggle for us to invest. I'll echo that sentiment. If it gets a PMA approval, if it's in an area of major unmet medical need, or if it's a large technical innovation, and we like those larger technical innovations, particularly in the med device side, like Channel Med Systems, Contrario Medical. We have a couple of these companies that are big leaps forward. We want to see the data, and we want to see the data that your technology works, and then the reimbursement will come. I will say though, particularly with our group, one of the things that we see with entrepreneurs pitching us is one of our partners was the head of a 550 physician medical group. And so with that sort of experience, we want to know what your reimbursement plan is. We want to know what your CPT codes are if they're there. We want to know your plan to get your CPT codes if you don't have them. And even more importantly, we want to know your plans for how you are going to convince doctors to use your device. Because if you don't get doctors on board with your plan, it's not affordable, and you don't have the CPT codes, and you're looking at an out-of-pocket situation, that could cause a significant amount of physician hesitancy. So we're definitely a group that looks at that, but because we do 510K, we do PMA, it's really a case-by-case situation, but definitely have a plan for whatever your specific situation is.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I definitely recommend, no matter how early the stage you are as a company and a product and a technology, spend some money with some outside experts, helping guide that reimbursement decision. You don't have to dig down and do huge studies to get it down to the decimal point. But for us as investors, we want you to have done that work before we evaluate funding clinical studies, because as Neil pointed out, you could very differently go down a 510K path or a PMA path with ultimately reimbursement driving the thought process, and 510K may look like the lower risk, lower cost way. And there are certainly applications where that is the right way to go. But unless you plan ahead for that several years before you start your clinical work, we don't have as investors confidence necessarily that that's the right path. And I think the bias towards more evidence rather than less evidence and a faster approval, we've just seen, partly we're in the business as investors of pattern recognition. So when we see 87 times that you can get a quicker approval with a 510K, but then it takes 9 years to get adoption, we don't like that math. Spend twice as much and do the right kind of study up front to drive those adoption levers, we think is the way to go. I'm the honorary Canadian in my partnership, so I've worked in Canada in the past 20 years working at the firm, working on the economics of a single-payer healthcare system and how important justification of cost savings is and system-wide adoption hurdles informs a lot of what we do down here in the U.S. because it's, at the end of the day, it's pretty similar these days.
The only thing I'll add is that I think it gets to what Neil was talking about, that when we see a really extremely compelling value proposition, such that there may be some customers that will be patients that will be willing to pay out of pocket before the reimbursement is totally worked out, that gives us a little more confidence. But ultimately, that founder needs to be thinking about reimbursement, working with consultants that consider reimbursement strategy, et cetera. But if there's a really compelling unmet need, pain point that a patient may spend $200-300 for a solution that has 510K clearance, or is a de novo device, that allows us to be a little bit more patient before more reimbursement can come down from there.
Just add one more thing. So we're in medtech. We're not in biotech. We can't put in $100 million into a company to get a couple experiments in the lab and an IPO 3 years before a patient is treated and get a 4X. That's just not the industry we're in. We unfortunately are on the other side where you can't build a company to potentially work in a couple people, and then 10 years down the road, maybe it gets approved 5% of the time. You have to build a company from day one to get paid. That's just the way med tech works. And that plan needs to be in place from day one. So it's not just a clinical utility validation, but it's also, as you guys pointed out, a plan to get, the tactical plan to get reimbursement. So you got to think about that from day one, because we're thinking about building a company to get not just approved, but paid consistently. Because those are the companies from a pattern recognition perspective we've seen sell for
It's all great points. I only can add that in my experience, the management always underestimates the struggle to get the reimbursement. And when they transition into the real world market, the pain they suffer is unimaginable from the from investor perspective. They are not prepared because they really don't get it how hard it is to actually get reimbursed. And okay, so moving forward, I would like panel's ideas on as far as how their decision is affected by the regulatory path and the regulatory jurisdictions. Because in past, some play has been, again, go the easier route, CE mark, but with the MDR kicking in, that is not the same game as it used to be, especially for people who are from the European side. It's just changed everything, and even more so with the LRQ disaster that happened, if they are familiar. On the European side, there's notified bodies and there's more complexity, and one of the largest one went out of business, so it caused massive disruption on that side. But given the kind of regulatory changes that have happened and the jurisdiction, how do you see that play in your investment decision? Lauren, why don't you kick off this time?
Great. So this is a really interesting question and a very fluid question, as I think that you've pointed out. And we've seen a lot of fluidity in this area in the last couple of years. One thing that I think has become very clear to us is that the FDA has become much nicer. We hear from our portfolio companies, we hear from companies that are pitching with us. If you ask for a pre-submission meeting and you go talk with them about your plan, they will help you and they will give you guidance. And it's almost getting to a point where we absolutely want to see those meeting minutes. And if a company is a significant way down the path towards designing their clinical trials and they have not had a submission meeting with the FDA, it gives us a moment of pause to stop and question it. In terms of going down FDA regulatory path or doing the CE mark first, we've seen a couple of companies try and get the CE mark first, attempt to commercialize in Europe, and then use that commercialization to fund their US trials. And we've seen companies have very limited success with that path. Politics aside, the United States is really funding healthcare innovation for the rest of the world. And we really like to see an FDA first type of regulatory path, not only because you're likely to get a higher reimbursement here to then go fund regulatory in other areas, but when you try and do it the opposite way, get a CE mark and then fund your regulatory trials for the FDA, we've seen companies really stumble with that path. But open and good consultants and open and clear communication with the FDA, I think, are becoming particularly more important in this space.
Oh, yeah, Jerry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, just echo that. We have also seldom seen a good return from the marginal dollar invested for small companies to commercialize in Europe first relative to the U.S. And we had a couple over the past year that decided to kind of get in under the MDR changes and file their CE mark, basically just to kind of put that over on the side to make it easier for an acquirer to not then have to deal with this, but really very limited plans. There are some fields where you can build a real business in Europe if you're confident you're able to come in and get our DRP. We've got a couple of companies that have successfully secured very attractive reimbursement in Germany, for example, and a very concentrated sales force and a very high margin product can support a selling infrastructure. But gosh, it's hard to replicate what J&J or Boston or Toronto or whoever can kind of bring to that. So why be your head against the wall? Reimbursement decisions are also getting much more challenging. We find over there. Japan is a little bit different. We have had some companies, as you guys probably know, Japan is in most classes the second largest medical device market in the world. And JFDA has also been pretty good to work with new innovations. So we have decided with a handful of portfolio companies in making the investment to conduct parallel clinical studies in Japan are both well received by thought leaders over there, by the regulatory authorities, and you can have a simultaneous approval with the U.S., which adds tremendous value when it comes time again to partner or think about a strategic sale of the company, just because of how large that market is. So that's one we've thought more about, frankly, in the past 5 years than Europe. Unfortunately, it's been an afterthought for most of our countries.
Yeah, I think there are a few things in play. One is if you, as a company, have unique relationships, insights, leverage, and there's a market draw for you to launch your business strategy should also always lead, and the regulatory is a piece of it. And if you factor in the change in the requirements for CE mark, and it still compels you to launch in Europe, and you have a new rationale for why you want to do that, you should probably continue with your plan. It will be, I spent a lot of time thinking about regulatory strategy. I have a firm that focuses on that. I spent 12 years at the FDA, and my sense is the regulations from the FDA and the path to market is still the clearest market and area in which you can figure out exactly what you need to do, at least for approval or granting or clearance. But I remember this so clearly. It was an Avenue meeting, must have been 7 years ago. He said, don't let regulatory drive your business strategy. It's a factor, right? And I still think that's true. You have a business strategy, factor in regulatory, how long it'll take in Europe, how long it might take in the US, and to go forward. The only other thing I would say is a dual parallel approach for most single product companies is not a good focus of energy and time. So pick a market to enter first. Don't try and do both at the same time.
I agree with everything that was said there. I'd also take a guidance from comps in the space. So depending on the therapeutic area you're in, the indication you're focused on, take a look at companies that have sold and where they were when they sold and the path that they followed. Sometimes they did have CE mark and had some initial commercial proof of concept, and then it sold on FDA approval because the acquirer felt comfortable. But that's not always the case. In fact, that's probably the minority. But just be conscious of that.
Yeah.
So, one of the questions usually gets asked, because we see assets from all over the world. So. And usually so many times they are focused on their initial market where they're located, and how does that impact our decision process. So I'll kick off with Jerry, because Lumira is like Canada, so we have actually in the last 12 months seen over half a dozen device companies who are focused on Health Canada as their initial approval path, And I just want to get everybody's opinion when you get these geographic specific companies. US is easy, but once you get because there's a lot of innovation happening all over the world. So I don't discount that good stuff is not coming out from every part of the world. It's just that how do you balance out your investment strategy against a particular nice technology but stuck in an area or geography that is not prime, So I would like everybody's opinion when they see those kind of assets. What is their feedback and how do they approach them?
Yeah, so Lumira has had a really long-standing strategy, dating back 20 years as a firm, which back in the early 90s was focused really only as a healthcare investor in Canada. We began to invest in the US around 97, 98, and then now 3/4 of our investments are in the United States. But a lot of how we invest in the U.S. is informed in that legacy coming from the market, which frankly is underserved from a venture capital point of view, phenomenal innovation, but not lots of capital. So in the U.S., we found a great strategy, frankly, investing principally in geographies outside of Boston and San Francisco. So our best returns, fund over fund, you look at the Southeast, Midwest, Pacific Northwest, Southern California, the Great Lakes states, and Canada, which is, compared to these other geographies, still an underserved. It's a crazy metric. I know across all healthcare venture, 5 years ago I looked at this 10-year data, the proportion of every healthcare venture dollar invested was, between Boston and San Francisco, accounted for 82% of every healthcare venture dollar. The next state underneath that was either New York or North Carolina, a lot of biotech there, and it was 4%. And then you got this long tail. Well, innovation is spread, we think, much more evenly when you look at NIH funding and academic labs and kind of the source of innovation. So we frankly love to go to geographies where other people are not. Maybe there's some challenges sometimes in building teams, but the ability these days compared to 20 years ago to outsource a lot of expertise and capabilities is pretty efficient way to build companies. Whether it's a Canadian company or US company, we don't think about Canada as kind of a Canadian market. None of our Canadian companies are really focused on Canada as a launch market. They're really building global companies, principally focused on FDA, US approval. So that's one way. But again, we love to take connecting flights to our board meetings. It typically means we're working with great teams, super motivated, and been very capital efficient by just the circumstances, not lots of capital sloshing around the local ecosystem.
I'll echo part of that in terms of underserved geographies. The point is very clear about having hubs in Boston and San Francisco, but there is innovation and there is great technology elsewhere. We have Dallas companies, we have Houston companies. We look at almost every technology coming out of UT Southwestern right now. We have a great relationship with the technology transfer office there. And we just giant research institutions that don't have the same history of commercializing technology, but are still generating great technology. So we're not really looking internationally, but we absolutely are looking within the United States, and we very much like to look at companies in Texas, in the South, and the Midwest. We have a couple in Wisconsin, for example. NovaScan is a company up in Wisconsin, and Bremer Diagnostics is a prostate cancer diagnostic also in Wisconsin, and it's part of our impression that there's a little bit more of a culture of capital efficiency, both among VCs that operate in the Midwest and Texas, and the companies that operate in the Midwest and Texas. And because of our check size, that plays into our model quite nicely.
I was going to say, there's also a distinction between a fund like Waymaker 360 Health, which is we have 17. I remember I was talking to a PE guy. He said 70? No, it's $17 million under management, and a firm that's above 100 million, and where we can hunt, source, and actively invest. So that's kind of a dirty little secret. I just want to put that out there. So for our fund, we're based in Pasadena. We love investing in LA-based companies. We actually think that's a bit of an underserved medtech community, right? Because everybody thinks of San Francisco, and if you're familiar with California, you think about Irvine, but you don't really think about LA. So we set out to own LA for medtech. Having said that, we're really excited about Nashville as an emerging market. You may make the case it's not emerging anymore. We will fly to Nashville. We have relationships with LPs in North Carolina. We're open to investing in North Carolina. So when you're talking to investors, quite candidly, the size of their fund may dictate to some extent where they invest, and it quite may be about geography.
Yeah, so international versus U.S. International, our documents stipulate we can't invest in companies incorporated outside the U.S. So that's a bit of a limitation. However, we will follow and give advice so that they do incorporate in the U.S. There are a couple examples there. Within the U.S., I think everybody will say, yeah, we don't care about the geography. Now I'm willing to jump on planes. My girlfriend and my dog don't really mind, which is nice. But realistically, there is innovation everywhere, and I would argue there is better innovation in non-core geographies because it is more able to generate a return, as Gary pointed out, capital efficiency and otherwise. It's tricky because investors like to invest in teams that they've invested with in the past that have made money. Typically, those teams tend to be local, in which case they tend to find technologies that are local, and that's just the reality of the situation, unfortunately. And furthermore, future investors and or acquirers like those logos on the slides that, unfortunately, in my opinion, tend to be based in those local geographies, whether they're logos from where the technology came from or who is helping the technology. And that's actually been a big learning for me in my role and in my career, which is I came in a bit naive, but unfortunately that's kind of the way I've seen things play out. So I think us as investors need to be more open to those entrepreneurs we may or may not have worked with in the past, that are strong but need good investors to back them to move forward so they can become that next entrepreneur that we back, that we have invested in the past. But typically that's kind of how I've seen things play out. So it's a bit of a brutally honest answer, but
well, I think you guys need to be aware of those biases too, right? And if you're located in one of those geographies, just understand that there are some of those biases maybe amongst the traditional investors based in a Boston or San Francisco, for example, and maybe you need to get a little bit more creative about it. But there's lots of examples of success, and I remember when we invested initially in Mako Surgical back in 2004, I think it was. No medtech venture fund wanted to look at the deal with us because inevitably they said, there's no way you can build a successful medtech company in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Like, why would you possibly want to invest in a company in Fort Lauderdale, Florida? So we had to get creative. Eventually, many of them did want to invest years down the road because Maurice and Steve built a phenomenal company and Stryker, acquiring it and had a big impact on patients. But we had to build an investment syndicate, which was a very unique collection of hedge funds and Brazilian private equity family offices, and again, put the capital together, and they all had expertise in the field, some health plan, coming in, strategic investment coming in, which is the other thing I recommend, is always on your guys' list as well too. But just understand those biases, because you can kind of knock your head against the wall for a long time sometimes without getting kind of the brutally honest answer. Sometimes from groups that just don't want to, look at the deal outside of something that's 4 miles from their office.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the other things is the value. For us, valuation is a very key point, and basically drives me out of San Fran and Boston areas because I just have a hard time. Again, I'm not the visionary that will figure out all 10 that when I went in would all pay out. So I have to spread my risk, and I can better do that in other geographies than going in and chasing with other 10 big guys who would up the price for nothing. So I kind of stay away from those big areas myself. But anyway, that leads me to the final question, after which will we open up the panel for questions from the audience, is what is really intriguing them out there in the world that they are really kind of seeking out as far as the next innovation front. I'll start with Kwame, with digital health and med device integration, there is a whole lot more going on than before. It is machine learning getting integrated with every device that I know of. So everything is moving at a much faster pace in that regard. So, Kwame, go ahead.
So I'll make a couple comments, and they're a little snarky, the first one. So if you have a digital health solution and you use the term AI, it's almost like bacon at this point. Everything tastes a little bit better than bacon, right? So it's like blockchain. There's this joke, if you stand in San Francisco and say blockchain, 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 that festival will pop out, right? So what I'm saying is we see a fair amount of digital health solutions, and we get excited about companies that have access to proprietary and large data sets that can help them differentiate, because there's not a lot of IP protection, generally speaking, in software. So some sort of protective moat. If you truly have a digital health solution, if you truly have AI that powers it, and typically it's not going to be a company that's trying to replace a doctor. I think we're still at this point where it's going to be a company that's analyzing images to screen and compare against a normal database and say, hey doc, this measurement is outside the normal range, but just makes it more efficient. I still think we're going to see a lot of products succeed in that way. And on the electromechanical side, we're actually seeing a significant number of robots, but not the robots that are doing surgery, but robots that are acting as companions to humans with a human kind of avatar, or robots that are in the home kind of helping that caregiver augment the work of the caregiver. So not the typical robot, the sexy Da Vinci robots, those types of robots.
Yeah, definitely echo the advice about the buzzwords in your business plan. We for real got a business plan about 1.5 years ago that had the words Bitcoin, cannabis, AI, and blockchain in the title page of the PowerPoint.
What
And
about machine learning? Was
no,
machine
on the
learning
AI,
included?
we saw it was AI enabled, of course. So including the cannabis part, which we didn't. And I'm sure they raised like $30 million from a consortium of angel investors, because that's kind of what you have to do sometimes. But kidding aside, the field generally of the integration of large data sets and what can be teased out of those via the new science and the insights around deep learning, machine learning, and AI, we think there's probably no greater source of value creation in healthcare in the next 20 or 30 years. We spend a lot of time, so Canada's been an academic thought leader in the field of AI, and we have a lot of connectivity to Hinton's lab at UT and Joshua Bengio's lab at University of Montreal. I think the heads of AI at Facebook, Google, Amazon, all postdocs coming out of Bengio's lab. So we spend a lot of time with those guys and invest in companies that take these proprietary data sets, and that's really the key of it, and then yield clinical insight and therapeutic interventions around that. So that's going to, I think, continue to be putting the business model questions aside around, is the buzzword really enabling you to create a high margin, high impact innovation for therapeutic benefit? That still has to be the focus. But yeah, it's sort of, given the pace of innovation, it's just some of the things we hear about almost on a monthly basis coming out of these labs, enabling insight into data set is very remarkable.
One of the areas we're pretty keen on right now, I would say, is life science innovation tools, and how it's sort of a segment, one could say, of medical device. We have a company called Mission Bio. This is a company that enables single-cell DNA sequencing, very important for cancer, right? Heme malignancies, when you have clonal populations of cancer cells, and this set may respond to one therapeutic and that next set may respond to another therapeutic, you want that information. A physician wants that information to design a treatment plan. So very, very sophisticated molecular biology tools that can either be used on the research side, and it's actively being used at MD Anderson, and they're publishing like crazy down there, it's great. Or that can start making its way into CLIA labs or labs that want to get this running as a molecular diagnostic to inform treatment decisions. So we really like that right now, that med tech area that is enabling research, enabling researchers to create large data sets, make new innovations, and our understanding of human disease, the pathology of human disease, and the course of treatment patients should take. But that's broadly applicable both in life science research as well as a clear path into making a difference in the clinic.
Swami, quick comment?
So, building on what Gary said, all the buzzwords are great so long as they drive clinical utility, and it can be proven in a appropriately designed 3 to 500 patient. But specifically for medical device, implantable medical devices, like heart failure treatments that treat multiple etiologies, not just a simple annuloplasty, for example. We like interventional oncology treatments because the acquirers, large and mid, are looking in that space and want to build those pipelines because they see all these biotech companies taking advantage of these big, good markets. We like women's health quite a bit. We think that's been an underserved space. We think there's a lot of opportunity for driving clinical utility. We've been successful at least once in this space. We'd like to continue to be successful in this space. And then interventional pulmonology is another space that we like. There aren't too many devices out there. These pulmonologists want to use devices. Devices can drive better treatments versus the drugs that people take 50% of the time. They don't work that well. So those are a couple of spaces.
Yeah, just to cap up, in the 16 to 17 transition, we were following a lot of companies, and almost 50 of them changed their name to AI. So it was very interesting, and I followed up with them. What did AI do? What was the data set that you used to become AI? It was never used to be more than 50 to 100 patients. So it was very interesting in that time frame.
It doesn't count.
Yeah. But anyway, so I'll open up the panel for questions from the audience.
So what are your thoughts, or what's your appetite for software as a medical device? So companies that may not want to build hardware, but they partner with hardware manufacturers, but they're focusing on just software algorithms and building out the data sets. I know, Kwame, you mentioned something about earphone protection and software or something.
You know, having said that, we're very open to software as a medical device. We're looking at a company that's spun out of UCLA. It has a large data set of spinal images, and they want to use it to aid that spinal radiologist in detecting, I forget the exact condition right now, but we believe that's a protective mode. And when they get a little bit further along and they've had a conversation with the FDA, they've done the pre-submission, we probably get involved with that. So we're very open to it. Yeah, I think it does get back to clinical utility and strong value proposition.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can you comment? It seems like every chasing 510K pathway as aggressively as possible, but almost by definition, you've been declaring yourself non-unique when it comes time to meet with CMS established funding. So I'm curious what your view is on taking a longer road at least into the EMA for a device, even though it may not be needed in any.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some success recently. As you know, FDA and CMS are newly collaborating, right, on approval pathways and simultaneous reimbursement decisions. So we've, our company Animatronics took advantage of that with their pivotal study, which could have chosen to do a 510K off of CardioMEMS, for example, but instead chose to do the IDPMA, but with CMS negotiations, so that an approval, the reimbursement is kind of there. So that takes longer, but probably adds more value, at the end of the day.
That's one. Go ahead, Laura.
I was going to say, we've had a somewhat similar situation where we had a portfolio company going down the 510K path, did a pre-sub with the FDA, and because it's a very litigious area with poor predicates, the FDA came back and said, actually, please don't. Let's do a PMA. And they have had the best, most consistent communication with the FDA and their review panel, helping them design their trial, giving multiple options, optionality. So, not only do we think that, like you said, PMAs tend to be a much bigger innovation in the space, but it just gets back to having that communication with the FDA, and that we've actually personally seen in our portfolio the FDA making that decision for this company.
But we put more money on that bet. We encourage companies to go that way.
Sure. I mean, because it probably leads to a higher demonstration of clinical utility that nobody can really argue with.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, to get paid, you still have to run that trial anyway.
Right.
So whether you get approval now or later, maybe you get approval now to cash flows for 1 to 3 million in revenues in some way, shape, or form. But that's a strategic decision that the executive team and board should make in this space.
Just to recap, in our experience, what we have seen is a lot of companies default to the easiest path because of the tightness in the money market. So that's what then drives their decision down to this rabbit hole of easier path, and then they struggle on the way back up quite a bit. So again, it's a difficult proposition. There's no easy answers for it. I would like to thank the panel very much. It was great.